Paul's Virginia Adventure by Joshua Huffman. On March 6th, Virginia held its Republican presidential primary. At that point, Ron Paul had not won a single state, and many Ron Paul supporters hoped that Virginia would be his first. After all, in this peculiar contest, he was not competing with either Rick Santorum or Newt Gingrich for the anti-Romney vote, as neither of these two candidates made the ballot. Once all the ballots were counted, Mitt Romney won the state with 59.53% of the vote as compared to Paul's 40.46%. However, the prospect of Paul winning the Old Dominion was not some mere impossible hope. For a multitude of reasons, Ron Paul should have won Virginia. When I spoke to the National Ron Paul campaign back in September of 2011, Virginia was not a particularly high priority for them. They were primarily concerned with caucus states, believing that they stood a much better chance in those than open primary states like Virginia. However, in December of 2011, that assumption ought to have changed. Due to Santorum's lack of grassroots support and Gingrich's potential fraud, only Mitt Romney and Ron Paul were eligible to appear on the Virginia ballot. No write-ins were allowed. Suddenly, winning Virginia became a real possibility. Or at least it should have been. After the early contests of Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, quite a few Santorum and Gingrich supporters here in Virginia encouraged their like-minded brethren to vote for Ron Paul on March 6th. The reasoning behind this logic was to diminish the momentum of frontrunner Mitt Romney. After all, if Mitt Romney could not win Virginia when facing Ron Paul alone, not only would it deny Romney quite a few delegates on his march toward victory, it would also weaken his credibility and hamper his fundraising prospects. However, the National Ron Paul campaign continued to display apathy toward winning Virginia, and neither opened any regional offices nor sought a multitude of venues for Dr. Paul to speak in the state. Disappointed by this lack of effort, volunteer supporters in Hampton Roads decided to open a headquarters in Norfolk, independent of the official campaign. They raised the money for the location, they bought the campaign materials, and they staffed the site, all on their own. Once I heard of this success, I contacted the campaign in the hopes of creating our own office in Harrisonburg. Surely the extreme effort and generosity of the Hampton Roads volunteers would convince the campaign to replicate these measures elsewhere. Alas, that was not the case. Although local Paul supporters pledged enough money to pay for the office, the national campaign refused to send even a bumper sticker to aid the cause. They were happy to sell their supplies, but providing them free of charge to volunteers was out of the question. Even worse, they refused any sort of legal recognition of the office. I was told that creating an office without support from the central campaign could land us in considerable legal trouble with the Federal Election Commission. Therefore, the idea of an office in Harrisonburg died due to this unexplainable indifference. Undeterred by this setback, I tried to organize my hometown of Harrisonburg for Dr. Paul. I asked for the necessary supplies and voter information to organize a door-to-door effort to educate citizens about Dr. Paul. Again, I received nothing from the national campaign, and thus the effort could not continue. Lastly, as primary day approached, I wanted to see most, if not all of the precincts in Harrisonburg and Rockingham County staffed by Ron Paul supporters handing out literature. Although many people would find this news shocking, it is true that a fair number of people go to the polls with no idea for whom they will vote. According to the state director, once again the national campaign ignored my request for supplies. If not for the generosity of the Ron Paul volunteers in the neighboring Shenandoah County, we would have been completely empty-handed. Despite this breakdown of the Ron Paul campaign, Ron Paul still managed to win 16 cities and counties in Virginia, including the 3rd Congressional District, which netted him 3 of Virginia's delegates. As far as I can tell, most of Paul's county and city victories stem not from the efforts of the national campaign, which were more or less non-existent, but rather the organization of his volunteers. I have heard that his volunteers were quite busy in Warren County, Portsmouth, and Lynchburg, which account for his successes there. Norfolk had a campaign office, so of course he took that city. Although he narrowly lost Harrisonburg, it is true the majority of people who voted in the city on March 6 chose Paul. Unfortunately, the absentee ballots proved to be unfavorable. Volunteers worked hard in Rockingham County too, and although Paul did not win there, he finished with a margin that was 5.64% higher than the statewide average. True, Ron Paul did pretty well by comparison in Virginia. But could he have done better, or even won the state if his campaign tried to do so? There's no doubt in my mind that the answer is yes. Neither Mitt Romney nor Ron Paul focused much effort in Virginia, and thus the vote hinged heavily upon the national media and the volunteer base. Virginia was like a quarter glittering in the snow. The Ron Paul campaign merely had to bend over, pick it up, and put it in their pocket. But they either did not see the glimmering silver, or they didn't think it was worth their time to do so. Mitt Romney continues to build momentum and delegates, and so his march toward the Republican nomination grows more certain with each passing day. A loss here in Virginia could have slowed this Romney train, but I guess the prospect of picking up this low-hanging fruit wasn't a tempting enough prize for the Paul campaign. And so ends Paul's Virginia adventure.